welcome everyone to the Community Economic Community Economic Development Committee meeting, March 10th, 2022. Mandy, would you do the roll call?
Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Miss Allard? Miss Kennedy? Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Rivera?
Present.
And for non-committee members, Mr. Dunbar, Ms. LaFrance, Mr. Perez Verdia, Ms. Quinn Davidson, and Ms. Salatel. Chair, you have a quorum.
All right, thanks. So we have an agenda. Any changes to the agenda? Oh, and anyone, if Chris online, go ahead and text me if you want to get in the queue. I'll watch that. So, starting off, we have the property tax exemption for ADUs, and Meg is working with attorneys to do an S version on that, which we haven't seen. So she expects to postpone it on Tuesday until she has time. So we'll probably see it in another Community Economic Development Committee meeting. Might go to a work session. We'll see. But today we'd like to get just a summary of where we are with ADUs.
Presentation.
Things are pretty good, so you should be good. Maybe just for the phone purposes so they can
Okay.
hear you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Daniel McKenna Foster. I'm a long-range planner in the planning department. I've been working with Dave and the rest of our group and a larger working group on accessory dwelling units for a few months. I'm going to share a little bit of just kind of general information today, talk about where we've been kind of moving, what we've been looking at, results so far. This is sort of a complement, I think, to the other ordinance that's going on, just to provide a bit of context to what's going in. So in thinking about how many ADUs we have in the municipality, we have two sources of data. We have the affidavits, which are required by code when somebody creates a new ADU. They have to go through this process. And we have the assessment records. So the two numbers are fairly different. I think our affidavit number shows there are about 249 ADUs. The assessment records show somewhere around 650. Those may not be as precise or maybe are looking at different things. So we have kind of a range of somewhere between 250 and about 650 ADUs in the municipality. All of the assessment data is available online at the Muni's open data portal. So this is where that 650 number comes from. It's very nicely laid out. You can look at it, and I should have changed the extent here because you can see actually the bulk of the ADUs are in South Anchorage, where probably the lot sizes are a little bit bigger. This is what ours looks like, and we basically have, when somebody creates an ADU, it goes into our list, but of course sometimes people maybe didn't manage to get the ADU or they built it without having one. So that's why we have a bit of a discrepancy in knowing exactly what.
So sorry, just for the recording, Forrest Dunbar is on the phone.
In thinking about ADUs over time, where we've been historically, so this is we're working on kind of the second evolution of the ADU ordinance, possibly. This is what traditionally Anchorage has been building since about 2005, and there wasn't a huge jump when we last updated the ADU code, but it did make a difference. It did increase the numbers. So they've been kind of slowly trending upwards. But it's not meeting the goals laid out in the plan, which calls for a certain number of compact units and kind of the overall housing goals of the community. In general, we kind of had the kind of internal goal to think about how could we get to 20% of building permits to be accessory dwelling units. That's sort of a generalized number based on what happens in other cities. Sorry.
Is this online? I'm getting a request.
No, and I was just going to email it. We'll get it posted as soon as I get it.
Okay, so for listeners online, this is not online yet. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. But we'll be glad to post this. All this data is publicly available. A lot of it's either building permit data or census data, and we have to update it for last year anyway. So just thinking about how does ADU production compare with overall housing unit production? It's good, but it's not what it might be. In a general normal market, you might expect to see ADUs comprise about 20% of the overall housing units. So we have a way to go to meet that goal. Just thinking about why ADUs, who cares? ADUs are a relatively efficient type of housing in terms of per unit cost. Now, these numbers you see here, it's a breakdown of different types of housing units and the valuation cost. So that's the valuation that the municipality puts at the time of permitting. It's not necessarily the cost, but it's a more or less an analog. It gives us a kind of idea of what it might cost to build one of these. So you can see that a single-family unit is pretty expensive per unit. Duplex comes down a little bit. Triplex, I don't know why that goes up. Maybe we don't have that many data points. Fourplex, it comes down. 5+ units come down. And an ADU is about $128,000 to build. Other kind of anecdotal data suggests that, yeah, generally it costs around $100,000 to build an accessory dwelling unit. It's easier, of course, to build it along with new construction attached to a new house. But if you're just interested in building an ADU, I think it's normal to expect you're going to probably be paying upwards of $100,000. But in comparison with other housing types, it's still a pretty efficient choice. Just in the broader perspective, thinking about why we need ADUs, why we need housing, I've always heard that a good rule of thumb for housing stock is that after about 40 years, you either have to replace it or you have to significantly update it. The roof, the boiler, some of the internal components. So this is census data looking at the age of residential units in Anchorage, and everything in gray is units that are already 40 years old or older. So those are the units that, if they haven't been updated, they probably need to be updated, or maybe they need to be replaced. So even if we look at all the housing units that exist right now, and we say, well, we have plenty of housing units. What's the big deal? We have a lot of housing units that are very old, and they're either going to have to be updated or replaced. And you know, sometimes it's cheaper to update than replace, and sometimes it goes the other way. And at least in our division, when we think about this, we think about the housing life cycle is trying to meet the needs of everybody at different stages in the cycle. So all of us have lived in different types of housing. All of us have had different types of housing needs at different stages in our lives. And we're trying to think about how do we accommodate that for using ADUs. Again, this is just one kind of tool in the toolbox, one piece of the puzzle. But as we all go through life, our housing needs change, our incomes change, our space needs change. And ADUs are just a piece of that, really kind of adding in a little bit here and adding a little bit more to the housing ecosystem, you might say. And we talk about this a lot, that ADUs are not the silver bullet, obviously. They're not going to meet all the needs or the projected needs that we have in the 2040 plan. But they are something that people can do fairly easily. They're fairly economical. And it's one way that you can potentially just add another tool that people who are otherwise maybe saying, I'm not going to build any housing, I'm not interested, but this just gives them the option to house a family member, house somebody they know, or make a little, use their land a little bit differently. And then to conclude, I just want to say that so far we've been working with ARP, NeighborWorks, Cook Inlet Housing, with a working group to think about our next steps, how to go through this. We've completed a survey last fall. We had over 330 respondents, just thinking about which aspects of the zoning code were responsive or not responsive to people's needs. That also is publicly available. That's online. And working with Lindsay Hayduke at NeighborWorks, she's done an even more kind of comprehensive qualitative study. We did the more quantitative stuff, doing a focus group in Rogers Park, and really kind of exploring what people's concerns are, worries, interests, etc. So we've been sort of building up, collecting information as we go through this process to provide an update to the ADU code, and it might be a nice complement to the other ordinance that's also going through from the mayor's office. So I'd be glad to answer any questions. All this information will be available. Thank you very much.
Felix?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So a few questions. ADUs is a hot topic in my district, which is Midtown. So first is, several of my constituents have always been curious about why there seems to be so much of focus on ADUs. They're confused about it because in their mind, multifamily residential construction seems to be more efficient for meeting our housing goals rather than ADUs. So it was surprising to see that 20% goal, 20% of permanent units in our city being ADUs. That seems like a big number. But you also said that that's comparable to other jurisdictions. So could you give me some of those jurisdictions of where they have met that 20% ADU? And then I'm curious, in those other jurisdictions where they have met that goal, are those ADUs actually being used as housing, or are they being used as rental? Excuse me, not rental, as
Short-term.
short-term or as sort of vacation properties or something like that. Because if our goal is 20%, well, 20% to do what? And hopefully that's not to for tourists or stuff like that, because that doesn't achieve the goals that we have of increasing housing. And then I'm curious to learn a little bit about the Rogers Park focus group and sort of who you met with and what were some of the outcomes of that. Thanks.
May I respond?
Yeah.
Okay. First, why to focus on ADUs? It's a great point. Why is there all this focus? Because that's never going to solve the whole problem, right? I think the thing about ADUs is they're relatively accessible and it's easy to wrap your mind around it. And also, for the average person, the average homeowner, it's something that it's kind of a concrete step that anybody can take or not take, especially since a lot of our work with AARP, they've really focused on this, because for people who want to age in place, a lot of times as they age, their house is bigger, they don't need that much space, but they don't want to leave their neighborhood. You can't exactly, in most neighborhoods, just pop up a bunch of high-density housing or 4 or 5 stories. But to add an ADU there, you're sort of enabling people in a way to stay in their neighborhoods, but downsize a little bit to meet their needs. So it's sort of a gentler step towards a little more flexibility in the housing stock. The 20% number, that's a very soft number. It's something that we kind of look at, and it comes from looking at the places where there's been a lot of ADU reform, ADU deregulation, mostly in California and all on the West Coast, not Portland, just the state of Oregon, because a lot of these were state-level changes. So in looking at that, it's really like, well, if these regulations are sort of relaxed or made more flexible, how does the market respond? And it usually rises to about 20%, and it doesn't go much higher than that. Because again, if you have 100 people in a neighborhood, and all of a sudden anybody can, say there were no regulations about ADUs overall, I guarantee that not 100 people are not going to build ADUs. Because again, it costs over $100,000. A lot of people don't want that. And in our survey, we even saw that people said, I'm not really interested. Some people said, I might be interested in exploring it. But again, it's a pretty big expense, and then the expense of managing it, even if it is somebody in your family, dealing with utilities and this and that. So it's just the kind of thing that I think it's kind of a bite-sized chunk that people can think about, and it's really accessible to existing homeowners, because they can, as people age and they think, well, I'd like to stay here, or I'd like to help my kids out, or help my parents out. So that's kind of, I think, what a lot of the focus is.
Possible. So just for the tape recorder, Crystal Kennedy is here. Good morning.
And in terms of your Rogers Park, so Rogers Park, the focus group was done by Lindsay Hayduke, she's doing a master's degree, I think. She's doing some really interesting. She shared it with us, so it's her project. I'd be glad to share her information. She works at NeighborWorks, but it really kind of augmented the stuff we were doing to get a little more. Our survey from the municipality was strictly based on what are the pieces of zoning that do or do not impede or inhibit ADU production. So we didn't get into we didn't ask about income, we didn't ask people's name, we were just interested, hey, where do you live? Have you seen any problems? What do you think we could fix? So.
Thank you.
Any other? Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so you're estimating the cost at $100,000. Is it the same if they build a separate unit in the backyard, or if they convert the garage with a bedroom? Is it less expensive to convert the garage?
That, I'm going to give you a softball answer. I think it's hard to say. I think the biggest distinction in cost comes from if you build it new with a new building, or you add on. Because again, it really depends. It depends what the lot looks like. It depends what the conversion looks like, how old it is. In California now, they're doing it. They have companies that will basically build it and bring it in on a crane and lower it into the back. But because there the market it's a little bit more matured for so many years, so they have a lot of private sector activity, basically developing these things and putting them in. Anchorage doesn't have. I don't think any other place has that. So it's really hard to say whether a detached or attached would be more or less cheap. Interestingly, I think in the survey, it seems that most people were more interested in detached units, but I suspect that a conversion is slightly less expensive. But again, a lot of people in the survey, they say, yeah, I'd love to pursue this, But of the people who actually did the ADUs, their responses were a little bit different. So I think it's one of those things that, yeah, I'd love to do this. And then you go to the builder and you get the quote and you say, well, I'm going to maybe reconsider. So.
Thank you.
I think we made it cheaper to do an attached one when we changed the code. We did Title 21 and Title 23 big code changes. And then we say, so it wasn't, you didn't have to do duplex standards?
Right. So in Title 21 and Title 23 are required two-family style construction, structural construction. And so by us removing that in Title 21, I think it makes it easier and cheaper to build ADUs.
So, anyone else? Questions? So, I mean, you mentioned that, like in Seattle, they have them pre-made and they just drop them on your lot. And I think some places have like pre-approved designs. So someone can come in and they don't have to be creative. You know, that's a barrier. Like, oh, maybe we'll put a design in it. That's a lot of hassle and you move on. Is anyone doing that here? Or would we do that as a city?
It's something we've discussed internally. I don't know that anybody's doing it on the private side. It's certainly worth exploration. In my experience, the issue with that is the hurdles come when you get to who's actually setting the designs. You know, it's usually a commission is doing it, a planning, and that's where people kind of because you're essentially deciding on the aesthetics of this entire set, which can be complicated. Fundamentally, though, I think it's a great approach, and it's something we have talked about. And we could, I guess, pursue it further. But at this point, we're really kind of going to the low-level stuff, like let's focus on are the setbacks an issue or the lot size or this or that. To develop that sort of thing, if there's interest, I mean, there's no reason not to do it, I think.
Seems like a business opportunity. If someone designs one, gets it permitted, then the next one's easier and we move on.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess just piggybacking on that, you know, I think it would be interesting to explore doing it like for specific neighborhoods. So as an example, Rogers Park, there are some examples of really good ADUs in Rogers Park and really horrible ADUs in Rogers Park that get people pissed off. So, you know, I think having something like that that's developed as a good example of what an ADU should look like in Rogers Park, I think they would appreciate it.
So on short-term rentals, it's possible on the exemption that, because we've got a lot of emails from people saying, well, okay, it's a good idea, but we don't want to subsidize a business. So if they're building it for a short-term rental, should we subsidize that, you know, with a tax abatement? So were there a restriction on these so that you can't do short-term rentals? I mean, it might just be you can't get a tax abatement if you do a short-term rental. But have you looked into that at any level, restricting the use?
There's been a lot of discussion about that. I was a housing planner previously in Oregon, and that was always a big issue as well. Ultimately, I think it's a policy decision because it is about what kind of behavior is appropriate or not appropriate for that. I think that's maybe a higher level than us. Of course, if we get the direction, we can, you know, translate that into code. But I think it's tough. It's difficult, right? Because some people have expressed interest in building ADUs as a way to generate income. And so it's kind of a trade-off. Is it worth getting an additional unit that maybe is used for a short-term rental for a period of years and then it transitions into somebody's grandparent living there, or not getting it at all? Again, that's a much higher level question. So the larger piece of the ADU discussion is that ADUs allow homeowners to become developers in a sense, and some people want that and some people don't want that. And as soon as you start thinking like a developer, you have to think about the bottom line. You have to think about, well, how am I going to pay this mortgage? How am I going to pay off this debt I took to create this? So we have the balance between housing production and paying for that housing production. You know, I think a lot of people just refinanced their houses in the last few years, so that opportunity to kind of plow that back in is gone. So it's a difficult question. I don't think there's an easy answer. And I'll also say that in some times the short-term rentals do provide a sort of transitional, if you move to a city and you can't find a place to live, you can live there for 2 weeks. I mean, everybody I know who's moved in the last 5 years, the first thing they do when they go somewhere is they live in an Airbnb until they can find another apartment. But of course, there are all these other people who use their Airbnbs just as an Airbnb every weekend. So again, it's a difficult question and kind of give you a softball answer.
No, I expect we'll be looking at that. So, Crystal, so we were looking at the 2A with ADUs, and we hope to have Meg's S version of the ADU tax exemption, but that's not ready. So her expectation is postpone it again on Tuesday. We'll maybe bring it here or have a work session later. But we just wanted a presentation of the bigger picture of ADUs as well. So. Okay. Anything else on this? So we did, if anyone minds, Andre's been...
Mr. Chair, I'm in the queue. I guess maybe I texted the wrong number.
Oh, go ahead. I missed that.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to say that this whole conversation about commercial units being developed using tax abatement is very difficult for me. And the reason why is the fundamental rationale of this whole initiative is to provide housing for members of our community. And using other people's taxes to underwrite the development of businesses for individuals is going to be a very high bar for me to cross over. And I have not been convinced in any way. So I look forward to seeing more rationale, but from a policy perspective, I believe the policy is housing for our members of our community, not hotel rooms.
All right, thanks, Chris. Hey, Chris, I'm watching my 317 phone.
Thanks.
For the QC
Thank you.
On the other one, sorry. If anyone minds, Andre Spinelli's here. He wanted to talk on ADUs briefly on this topic. So, Andre, go ahead. Star 6.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, after hearing some of the comments, that to give some kind of current perspective on the real estate market. The housing prices are kind of gone up so much that I think there's a lot of people in Anchorage that are looking to downsize, but they're finding that downsizing might actually increase their monthly budget. And so to create an ADU within an existing home is, in my mind, the cheapest or least expensive way you could possibly add housing units and utilize existing housing stock that's currently maybe being unutilized, because I'm sure everybody knows somebody that's living in a house that's too big for their, current needs if their kids are out of the house. So I just thought that that was something that should be mentioned based on some of the questions I was hearing.
Yeah, appreciate that, Andre. I suppose if there's anyone else in the audience on this topic, you can chime in. This will be our rolling audience participation.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, who's that?
this is Katie Severin from AARP Alaska. I'd love to make a quick comment if I could.
Sure.
Thank you so much. And Daniel, it was a great presentation, even listening to it over the phone. So looking forward to seeing the video. I just wanted to say we're really appreciative that the city is interested in figuring out how to spur more ADU construction. Daniel said that ADUs are a relatively efficient housing solution as far as cost per unit. And then you also heard him say that our ADU market share is good, but not what it might be. And he talked a little bit about the importance of ADUs as part of a housing solution to allow seniors to age in place. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about that and make sure that that comment didn't get buried. It's really important that we get updated or new housing, given the age of the housing stock that Daniel talked about, if we expect to keep the senior population in Anchorage. Our state has the fastest growing senior population per capita, and it's driving economic growth statewide. And as Assemblymember Rivera asked, why the focus on ADUs? They're a nimble solution that allow people to age in place, to give them the option to keep their neighborhood and their social network. So just wanted to conclude by saying we're very supportive of the ordinance. We're very supportive of additional regulatory changes that would incentivize ADU development, and very grateful to be working with Daniel on the ADU committee or working group that he's put together. So thanks to the committee for picking up this topic, and we'll attend any future meetings and give comments then. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone else in listener land? Okay, so I think we're done with this for now. Is that...
It's Mike Edgington here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I was just going to quickly just mention from a Girdwood perspective, of course, We actually have some changes we're proposing separately to the initiative that Daniel is leading that are specific to Girdwood, which are going to be, I think, in front of P&Z next month. And also the other use case, which I haven't heard much about, is in an area like this where housing costs are so expensive, an ADU, if you're using it for long-term rental, hopefully, also provides kind of a method that people who are just on the margins of being able to afford to buy housing, it gives them another income option as well. So what I see from our perspective is ADUs, when they're used in the long-term market, can help both for people who are on the cusp of buying property and for people who need to rent. So it helps in sort of those two parts in the continuum.
All right, thanks, Mike. Pete?
John, I have another question. Oh, sorry.
Okay, Chris, let me do Pete, and we'll get right back to it.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the ADU is, so does it help the REIT when you go to sell a property that's got an ADU on it? Does it help selling it, or does it make it more difficult to sell it? Do we have any ideas on that?
My impression anecdotally is that it helps to sell. I mean, it is increasing the value, and it's another kind of feature of the house. But I don't have any evidence to back that up. So it's something I'll look into.
And so could someone use that? Could it help them to qualify to buy the property since they're going to be able to rent that unit out?
So a couple of weeks ago, there was a presentation by the White House, and a lot of financial groups were talking about that, and they were kind of to Mike's point about thinking about housing with an ADU attached as a way to consider that in the loan criteria and say, okay, well, you're getting this, we're expecting this income to come from this ADU, so we're going to give you're a more less of a loan risk, I guess you might say. So yeah, to your point, yes, it does seem like the financial institutions are moving towards considering this as a way, specifically to what Mike's talking about, is as a goal to get people into home ownership at certain income levels. I would also point out, though, that that's kind of solidifying the use of the ADU as an income-generating tool, which might be contrary to other priorities. So, again, it's just kind of a weighing it back and forth. But it has been interesting in the last maybe 5 years. Initially, there was no financing for ADUs. Banks just didn't know how to deal with it. They didn't. Now I think it's gotten a little more precise and it's matured a little bit. And now they are even looking at saying, well, if we can expect this income stream from this ADU to help you pay your mortgage, then we're more likely to give you the loan. But again, that's a much bigger question about what that actually means in terms of the short-term rentals or other rentals. So.
All right. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to raise a similar concern, but I actually don't agree with the statements that I've heard. What I understand is that, yes, you can use the income from an accessory dwelling unit in consideration of the loan, but only if there's a history of rental or you have a lease agreement. And so it actually doesn't really help someone who's trying to get into the market, new first-time home buyer, to have an income property associated with it. It just extends the cost and creates more of a liability from the financing perspective. And so banks don't lend on empty rooms. They lend on lease agreements, and they lend on history of rental income.
Thanks, Chris. Crystal?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess in general, we've had some conversations out in Chugach Eagle River because we actually do have quite a variety of types of ADUs, if you will, and some probably legal, some not. But over the years, they've kind of evolved in a lot of different ways. And one of the things that the Chugach Eagle River Advisory Board advised was that there would be some flexibility in the criteria for what an ADU even is. And I know I've got one constituent who has a very large lot. I think it's a little over 5 acres, and actually has 2 houses on it. And one was the initial kind of like homestead, very small house. And then when they started having a family, they built the bigger house. But because they now had two houses on one lot, they had to basically turn the original house into a storeroom. And as long as they took the oven out, it no longer qualified as a house, and then became a shed. So, so her concern is that, here's just, a very decent facility that could be used for other things. And now that she's getting older and she's getting more about, becoming that senior that needs the smaller place, and then, and then somebody else needs the larger house, she's wondering at what point could she move back into that other house, and use it kind of as she ages in place, if you will. So, some flexibility there that would allow that to actually be, because it's a bigger lot, to actually have that smaller dwelling, ADU, if you will, if it were to be designated as such, would actually be usable. So, anyway, that's something to consider. The other thing that, if I remember correctly, there's something in there that says that an ADU can only be occupied by 2 people, that there's a maximum. I thought there was something in there that said something about 2 people, 2 persons.
I know it says 2 bedrooms. I should probably code.
I don't
Okay.
know that it said anything about 2 people. I think it's
Well, that was one of the things they didn't want to see to be restricted, especially if you've got a young couple that has a baby. What do you do with the baby
Right,
then?
right.
Anyway, so just as long as there's not that kind of a restriction on numbers of people. I mean, certainly there probably would need to be in some cases, especially, you're not going to put 15 people in a place where you've got sewage capacity or water capacity for 3. But anyway, just to make sure that that wasn't going to end up limiting somebody from actually being able to rent or to live in an ADU. Thanks.
Good, thanks. So I'll go Felix and then Dean. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I would say my district has probably a different perspective, and that is their biggest concern about ADUs is the amount of people that could be squeezed into one and how that impacts parking, especially in a lot of the alley neighborhoods where ADUs are likely to be very common. So they want to make sure that there's not too many people in any single unit. Thanks.
Thanks. Dean?
Yeah, thank you. I was looking up the definition for ADU in Title 21, and Crystal mentioned the 2-bedroom limit. There's also the size limit, 900 square feet. So that does seem to like neutral options in terms of how many people can live with 900 square feet, 2 bedrooms, and that smaller space. But my question is, if it's over that amount, if it's over 900 square feet, what do you call this? Is that prohibited, or is that duplex, or what are the controls for something?
Yeah,
trying to do something.
It would be considered a dwelling unit. It wouldn't be by definition an accessory dwelling unit. So I think in Crystal's case, maybe the unit, the original homestead home actually didn't meet the definition of an accessory dwelling unit, so they had 2 options: either convert it to storage space or remove one of the components of a dwelling unit, like the kitchen or a bathroom or stove or something like that, so that it's no longer considered a dwelling unit. But certainly, in this effort to amend our regulations, we're looking at all of these things. It is our intent to bring some of these non-conformities into conformance.
Good, thank
Do you have some history of enforcement actions for structures that exceed the limits?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, anything else on this? Thanks. Forrest wants us to get rolling on the rolled curbs. He's got to leave at 10. So, okay, we appreciate this. Obviously, it's a complex and important issue, so we're doing more. So the rolled curbs, we've actually it's been lingering out there for quite a few months because we introduced it at the assembly and did what becomes an awkward thing is it goes to the planning commission, and I think did plating also?
Correct.
Look at it goes to plating, and it comes back to us in a form, and basically I guess we've discovered more than once that really complicates things, but doing it that route, but here we are. So we have a number of versions. We have the basic version that first went, then we have a substitute version that came from, I think maybe planning, but from the planning commission and plating process.
Correct.
Right? And that, at our public hearing, we heard from builders that really didn't get them where they needed to be, and they would just, if that was the plan, they would just continue to go for variances for the vertical curbs. And part of our goal here is, if you have a part of code that people seek variances for frequently, you probably need to relook at that. So that was part of our reason we started looking at this. So then we came up with a S1 version, which was introduced. Dean, was that on the addendum, or did it get on? Is it on the regular agenda? That S1 version.
I think it was on the it was on the regular agenda.
Okay.
We had a discussion.
Okay, so the S1 version is probably not the ideal version because Dean had a better one simultaneously, but I've sent in the S1. So we had Dean's version, but in the meantime, Andre Spinelli talked with Brad Coy, who was looking at all of these, and came up with what we have in front of us, the S2 version. So this is all becoming like reapportioning, where we have 10 versions. We haven't hit 12 yet, but we could strive for that. But this one, I believe works. And if you haven't had a chance to look, elements of it are very familiar. My sense now is that S1 is probably like our key item, which would be on Thursday, maybe on the addendum for us to look at on Tuesday.
I'm sorry. The S1 is on the regular agenda for the March 15th. I just checked.
S2, okay.
But the S2 is not. Yeah.
Right.
We were, I think, we intended to submit the S2 for the agenda.
I believe so. That's what we'll discuss right now. So that's my pitch on this. Brad's not here. Is there someone here who just wanted to go through this and the discussion? I don't know. You probably wouldn't be prepared. You didn't have anything. So I thought Brad might be here, but can you text Brad? But I think Andre's here and could.
Could you just run up and
Andre, did you want to go through this and talk about your working with Brad on it?
I think he's.
If you're there, you're breaking up or muted.
Can you hear me?
There you go.
Okay. Yeah, I actually just saw this morning and was reading through it just right before the meeting. This looks like the best version that I've seen since. And I guess I'll just let everybody know that we had been going back and forth on this thing, and the home builders and the development community this is something that's just kind of bothered us ever since it went into code. I built, what I think is one of the only new residential small lot subdivisions with type 1 curb that's gone in since the new code was brought forward, the new Title 21 in 2014. And I think I don't know if you guys have seen it or remember seeing it, but I've sent out the picture, and we just really, on a 50 or 60 foot wide lot, between the driveway ramps up and down and the way the sidewalk code and the DCM worked, you only ended up with about a 15-foot section of actual type 1 barrier curb, and then the sidewalk is kind of going up and down throughout the subdivision. So it didn't make a lot of sense, and every subdivision since has been going for variances. And so I called up the traffic engineer to just have a conversation and explain from the developer standpoint what's going on. And it was pretty good. I talked to Brad McCoy and Randy Ribble, and honestly, I couldn't believe it. They go, "Oh, we've never really heard this side of the story before," which was amazing to me because it's something that we've been talking about for years, but apparently the developers in the traffic department never got together on this topic. So anyway, I guess that's all I got. There's just to provide a little bit of info, is I just called up traffic to explain the development community side, and this is what they kind of came back with, and it seems to work from my perspective. So that's all I got.
Okay, thank you. Dave Whitfield speaking.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. As you mentioned at the beginning of this item, we've had a lot of variances, and I would agree that when you have variances granted for every subdivision that requires or that has a desire to do rolled curb in lieu of barrier curb, it's time to look at an amendment. And Brad and I talked about his proposed amendment here in the S2 version, and I believe that the language that's being proposed here is better than the previous version. I felt like the previous version and this one are a bit duplicative, and I think this is, in my opinion, a more appropriate language, and I think helps the development community deal with these situations where maybe type 1 barrier curb is not appropriate.
Good, thank you. Welcome,
Mr. Chairman.
Brad.
Yeah, glad to come.
Drag you out. So we just got to this item, and Andre spoke briefly on his conversation. And then I don't know, did you want to? I think a key point on here is it says municipal traffic engineer determines in that section. So suppose someone comes, they have the rules, they come to you and say, I want to do it different. Maybe tell us how that works and what your criteria would be.
Yeah, so this item 3 that's in here allows for the judgment in situations where a developer has some extenuating circumstances, and so they would come and present to us some of the items listed in here, such as topography, because that could be a challenge that might limit the ability to provide as much of the buffer that's listed in the prior one, the 3 feet separation, or the developmental lot size, driveway spacing, dimensional standards. So these are the things that, as a developer is wanting to do a rolled curb with adjacent sidewalk, that we would want them to explain to us why they can't fit the 3-foot buffer or why a type 1 is not ideal. And Andre did provide a picture of one of his developments that had type 1 barrier curb that had up and down, and really was not improving walkability. And so that's also part of what's written in here is type 1 in a certain situation going to improve walkability or not? And if it's not, then that's kind of what this is about, right? Because our concern of having type 2 curb with the rolled curb next to a sidewalk is that drivers will regularly go and park on the sidewalk, and that's not the purpose of the sidewalk. And so trying to get away from that.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I hear a voice. Who is that?
Mr. Chairman, this is Bill Taylor, if you can hear me.
Okay, can you hold on just a moment, Bill? I'm going to go around the room first, and then
okay.
We'll get to you for sure. Thanks. Is there anyone else? Chris, anything? Boris?
No, nothing from me, John.
Okay. Okay, so go ahead, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to get a clarification for item B2. And when we have an instance where we have sidewalks attached to the rolled curb, this addresses when there's a minimum separation of 3 feet, but I wanted to try to understand when we have a situation where you don't have 3 feet separation, you have an actual sidewalk attached to the back of the rolled curb.
Can you address that, Brad?
Sure. So in a situation where you're recommending or proposing to have the sidewalk attached to the rolled curb, that's where the item 3 would come in, where we would be looking for information that we could use to make a judgment of whether walkability would be impacted by that, such as, is it not possible to have that 3-foot buffer due to topography or some other needs? Or if you if you did the rolled curb, is that going to actually be better for walkability than the type 1 barrier curb? Particularly in the case where you have driveway after driveway after driveway, where everything is so close together that up and down is worse than just let's have a constant rolled curb. Or where your driveways are so close that you're not going to get many cars parking and going up onto the sidewalk because they'd be blocking driveways. And so in a situation like that. But it was hard to write all of that into here. So instead of trying to explain all of that in code, that's where this item 3 came in. And one thought that we've had is to write a policy document, kind of like we do with the driveway standards, that could give some examples and clarify what this item 3 is meaning so that everyone has a clear picture of the sorts of determinations that we would make and sort of information and maybe some details. And because really what we don't want to do is just have rolled curb with adjacent sidewalks become the norm, especially in locations where it is going to impact walkability.
Great, thank you. Bill, did you have a follow-up?
Just a quick question. So that does give you very broad judgment on the definition of walkability, I guess is my question.
It does give us the judgment, the ability to make a determination. Our experience in talking with my staff who are seeing proposals come in is we would expect item 3 to apply to only a very few instances. That's our anticipation or our hope. And we do anticipate putting together a policy document that will make it more clear. It just seemed like that policy document would be a better approach than trying to lay everything out in this item.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
All right, thanks. And that was Bill Taylor for the recorder. Crystal?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to talk a little bit about the minimum 3 feet. And is there any kind of information that basically supports the idea that 3 foot limit or minimum you have to have in order to actually keep somebody from rolling up or driving up on a rolled curb and then actually parking in the grass? Because I tend to see, I've seen much smaller spaces than that, maybe 18-inch type spaces that for whatever reason, if there's grass there, people won't park on it. And so what's the magic about the 3 feet versus doing something a little smaller?
Right, so the 3 feet comes from more of what you would typically put in that buffer. Mailboxes, street signs. Like for example, the stop sign. The stop sign is 3 feet wide, and it needs to have some separation from the road for clearance. And so to be able to, if you don't have enough of a buffer, then you're putting your stop sign on the other side of your sidewalk, which just pushes it further from the street. And so that 3 feet allows for just the practicality of actually putting your signs in, doing your street lights so that they aren't moved too far off, doing the mailboxes. And so that's really where the 3 feet comes in and does give some of that buffer. So it's not just the parking issue, it's also those implements that are there in the buffer.
Okay, thank you.
John?
Carly at Aiken Planning. When we were working on the S version, we also heard from Randy Gribble in traffic that the 3 feet is what maintenance equipment needs to take care of that vegetated space between the back of the curb and the sidewalk. So anything smaller than that, it's a little bit hard to take care of like the grass and vegetation that grows in that area.
And the one other item is snow berms. It also pushes the sidewalk far enough away that it's a little bit easier to have a snow berm that doesn't impede on the sidewalk.
All right, thanks. Anything else? Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. They added sidewalks to my subdivision here about 5 years ago. One of the sidewalks, the curbs are connected, and once we got around the corner, then they had the 18-inch separation where they stuck the mailboxes in. And it's amazing, the street that the sidewalk is right next to the curb. People pull right up and drive right up on the sidewalk. But like Crystal said, where there's grass, they're not going to park on the doggone grass for some reason. And that's just the reality of the situation.
All right, thanks. Dean?
Yeah, thank you. Speaking of the buffer and the need to be able to install certain, I guess, facilities like stop signs, you mentioned street lights, but since these are only residential minor streets, there wouldn't be any street lights and that kind of thing. But I guess stop signs, street signs, lamp posts, lighting, those are the only types where there would be a residential minor streets, is that right?
Lighting, yeah, we wouldn't have signals there.
Oh, when I say streetlights, I'm thinking of not stoplights. I call those traffic signals. So I'm sorry, so those are, I consider traffic signals. By streetlights, I mean like lighting along the street. Sorry about that.
And for street lights, for lighting, 18 inches isn't enough? Is that sort of what you were saying?
Where you have the sign, like you got the stop sign here, the edge of the stop sign, the travel way needs to have 18 inches, 1.5 foot separation, so that someone driving down the road, maybe who has an overhang of their rear view mirror, isn't hitting the sign. So that's a national standard of about 1.5 foot minimum.
That makes sense. And I would just mention something about the 2 feet separation here, or whatever. I drafted that in. It was based on the staff packet, but a lot of the dialogue and discussion in staff packet was about a 4 foot buffer. So 3 feet actually is a little reduction. There was one point I think from the project development division that said 3 feet. And so that was sort of a little compromise here between 3 and 4. But I didn't see anywhere where anybody suggested 18 inches.
Oh, so 4 feet would be great, because if you have a 4 foot buffer, that allows, ideally for the stop sign or for one of these signs, to not overhang the sidewalk a little bit. The signs do have to be placed 7 feet up so that you can walk under them without hitting your head. But a 3 foot buffer, if you put the stop sign in that buffer and have the 1.5 foot separation from the traveled way, chances are a portion of that stop sign will overhang the sidewalk a little bit, maybe a foot. So that's where that's starting to get a little bit narrow. But that might only be like at an intersection, so it's not sign after sign after sign that someone is having to watch their head.
My impression is somewhat that the perspective of 3 feet versus 4 feet. 4 feet is preferred by a whole bunch of perspectives and disciplines. And development, pedestrian safety, and so forth. And 3 feet is a little more favorable to private development and developers. So that's sort of the trade-off. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you, Dean. Crystal?
Thank you. So is there a standard for the width from which a stop sign can be from the edge of the street? I mean, is there an amount where it can't be farther than, or it can't be more than so many feet? Because I know I've got one place in one neighborhood where the sidewalks are right there on the side of the road. The stop signs are obviously on the other side of the sidewalks.
I'm not aware. I can check with my staff. I know that we don't want them to be too far, because
you won't see them.
Then
right?
you won't see them, especially if you've got vegetation. It becomes really challenging. So.
So I was just thinking that in terms of if somebody is trying to do like an 18-inch and you allow that, and you don't want to put a stop sign there, and then you've got another 3 feet. Now you're putting your stop sign 4.5 feet away from the edge of the road. And at what point does it get to be too far, where it's not safe or not reasonable?
Yeah, and I think in all those instances, sure, that isn't as ideal as closer, but those distances don't cause me concern if it's just the other side of the sidewalk that is closer. In certain instances, it really kind of depends on the vegetation, the sight distance, sight lines.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Thanks, Crystal. Anyone else? Forrest, any comments?
No, I'm just hopeful that we can get this, get some version of this passed.
Okay, thanks. Chris?
No.
Okay, thanks. Anyone in audience land want to speak on this? Hearing none, we'll go to Crystal.
Sorry, one more question. You know, I appreciate the fact that there's some flexibility in here, and but when you get to the point where the traffic engineer is the one that's going to be determining maybe when there's a potential need for allowing for the roll curve just because of the situation, if the traffic engineer decides to still deny or decline that particular setup that the developer wants to do, is there any kind of appeal process to that? I mean, what would happen if somebody wanted to fight that decision? Thanks.
David?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So if the traffic engineer, so option number 3 allows the developer to do roll to curb with an attached sidewalk. By right, a developer could use option number 2, which allows roll curb with a 3-foot separation. If the developer opted not to do option number 2 with the separation, and the municipal traffic engineer denied option 3, they would be required to go through the variance process with the planning board.
Thank you.
Very good. Anything else on this? So, so we'll get this on the addendum, this S2 version, and we'll have a variety in front of us then on our growing thick packet. So we'll see. But I mean, my intent would be to move this version and have a discussion on this. So, and I think I've talked to Brad a little bit that if you have a policy, I wouldn't want to rush it. But if you have something ready by Tuesday, we can add it. You know, lay on the tables in AM or something, just for people to see. But I'd much rather have you get it right than get it fast. So, and any other information you might have. So, and Carly, I don't know that we've met, but you've worked on this a bit. I've seen your name on it, so I appreciate that. Okay, anything else? Moving on to marijuana. So, thanks everyone. Mandy can take this. We have some new changes coming forward, and we have what we've been calling the omnibus marijuana ordinance. It's been out there for a while. Not critical to happen right away, but something we need to get on at some point. So, Mandy, you want to just go through this?
Yes. So the 3 items, they're posted on the committee webpage. It's the 1080. These are changes that the state has incorporated into their code, and it affects ours. And these are really just clarifying changes that have passed. And so they're items that can go into the big omnibus AO that we've been working on. They're not anything that's hindering the normal processing for the licensees or the businesses. It's just more clarification of what they need to be doing that they've already been doing. So the first one is the packaging and labeling. They clarify that it's at the point of sale in 3, and then they added a 4 that has more information on what the final packaging, the opaque, child resistant, all of this, how it has to be when it exits. And they added a definition under that section for them. We've changed, that's one of the differences for ours, is we have the definitions in a separate section. So 1080, 990 is our definitions. That's the 3rd page, and you'll see I added that as a new definition. And then for the restricted areas, again, this is clarification that they need to have their marijuana handler card either on their person, displayed, or in an easy accessible place. They have to be able to grab it really quick if enforcement comes in and asks about it. And then same thing under the security standards. It just mimics that change. So these are kind of minor additions that we can add in. There are a few, I think 3 that are proposed changes that are still out for public comment that AMCO sent, and I have emailed those to the body as just kind of FYIs. So those will be something to think about soonish, but right now they're still just proposed changes. So these are the ones that actually have been enacted.
Okay. Thoughts on that? All right, thanks. Dean, how's that omnibus going?
I apologize for the really somehow, but it seems to be just a matter of juggling priorities.
Okay, it's getting longer.
Miss Honest, I missed which one you said passed, and the other 2 were still under consideration.
So the ones that are in these 3 have passed. There are, these changes have been incorporated and have been signed off on. The ones that are still out for public comment, there's one that includes enforcement actions. There's one that includes a proposed allowance of a transfer of location for a license. And I don't recall what the other one is off the top of my head, but I think it was maybe like a secondary off of the transfer of location, if I recall correctly.
Thank you.
For the recording, Ryan Yell has entered the room. Did you come for the marijuana stuff?
I did.
Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mandy, you said that the state had already made these changes that are in red? Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, any more on this? We just reviewed the AMCO recent changes and brief update. We have that omnibus ordinance that's been parked for a while, but it's not critical, and it remains parked for right now. And I don't know, did you have anything to add about?
Nothing to add, Mr. Chair. I'm just here to answer any questions if somebody has inquiries about Title 21, if this will affect it at all, but it won't. So.
All right, thank you. Okay. Nothing else from this room? Anyone online? Chris, Forrest?
Nope.
Okay, so moving on. Ongoing business, nothing active there. Old business, nothing there. Audience participation, is there anyone in the audience who'd like to speak? You can unmute. I'm sorry, did I miss something?
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Chair. So we weren't going to go over this list?
Which is that?
This is the 2022 goals review of lists is on the agenda.
I suppose we could. I thought we'd gone through these and kind of approved them, and we were going to put them in the form. But they can be
Okay, so is that the
active
next step?
and-
Is you're going to put it in the form, and then we'll take a look at them?
Yeah, I think that was a nice form she had where you
Yeah.
kind of prioritize that stuff. I just haven't done it.
Okay.
It'll get done. Was there anything to change on this? Or?
Just, I guess, just for my part, I think it would be, being selfish here, would be great to move number 21 up a little bit. That's all.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's, I don't know that these were in a priority list. And I think that was a nice thing on Claire's, that it would let us do that. So once we get it on there, we can kind of look at what the thing is. Tudor Elmore, ongoing, no timeline, prod this along. I don't know what priority that makes them. Prod it along. So, do you know something we don't know?
No, I don't, but I'm good at prodding, so don't worry.
Okay, good. No, it'd be nice to do something there.
Well, Mr. Chair, we're getting close to checking one off.
Oh, which is that?
The roll curves, 11A.
Yeah, look at that. And the cleanup standards is somewhere in process. I'm unclear on that, even though I guess I'm shepherding that. I was looking the other day and going, where is this thing? It's pretty far along, but and far along and nowhere at the same time, because I don't think we have it actively back on our agenda. I think probably not the 15th, meeting coming up, I'll put it on there. It's not like a crisis issue right now. It's just something to approve for long term. But yeah, that's good. It's nice to check something off. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if it's a question or a comment. But since Mr. Rivera brought it up, looking at that list, the very last one on there is staff support for the Chugach Eagle River Advisory Board. And, you know, we've had a bit of a discussion lately about whose responsibility, which department's responsibility it is to staff that advisory board. And I don't know how to kind of reconcile an answer on that one, but right now in code, it is the municipal clerk's office's responsibility to staff that. However, there's been conversation about, since the point of the advisory board is basically doing land use and zoning issues and plating issues, and anyway, that it might be better fit to be staffed by somebody from community and economic development or planning department. Or, anyway, so I am planning on putting in a first quarter budget review amendment for $20,000 to see if we can't designate funding for a specific staff person, and then that will actually be set. And so anyway, I don't know if we want to have a conversation about that, or even if Mr. Gates has, you know, an opinion about whether or not we can actually do that when in code it says that the staffing responsibility belongs in the municipal clerk's office. So anyway, maybe that is part of a conversation to have, is, you know, how do we actually move forward to make sure that that advisory board gets staffed and they can meet the way they're supposed to meet and have the records on record and have things on the website and all that, because, you know, that's one thing they got dinged on their audit last year, and a lot of that is because there wasn't a designated staff person to actually manage all that and supervise those things. So however we can go about getting that settled would be good. So I know it would give the board's chair a sigh of relief.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you for backing us up to this item. Obviously, stuff
Yeah,
to
you
discuss.
did it. Yeah.
Who in the planning department lives in Eagle River? It's a long drive.
Oh, long drive.
Okay, Dean, go ahead.
Yes, I would just add to Ms. Kennedy that we are looking at a code change, and I think then my only other director opinion at this time is you should ask for 30,000, not 20.
Really?
Sure.
I mean, they only meet 2 or 3, maybe 4 times a year. They're not meeting every month.
Maybe to accommodate the increased travel expense and
Yeah.
gas costs.
They might need more too, though, if they had regular staffing,
Well,
because they're always behind the game, it seems like.
Exactly,
Not because
and there
of
are a lot of things that get left out of that they just, you know, weren't notified of. And especially, I think, from the workings of the plating committee, you know, they very rarely get information about that. They've recently gotten information about the ADUs, so they were commenting on that. They just met about 2 weekends ago on that one. So anyway, yeah, it's something that with staff support, they can function much better. So we just need to make sure that there's funding in there to make that happen. Thank you.
Yeah, I wonder, I mean, is there a way if they, you know, run meetings, the person running the meeting can be remote? Is that possible? Do they have to go out to Eagle River? Yes, staff. I guess that's awkward.
Well, it kind of depends on how it's all set up. I mean, you can obviously do recording on Zoom, but the way they're doing it right now, they hand Debbie Osiander a recorder, tell her to, you know, record and then give that to Parks and Rec. Parks and Rec is supposed to download that onto the website somehow. Anyway, there's way too many disconnects, and it needs to be something that's a whole lot more settled.
Okay, well, good, we appreciate that. Well, anything else on our goals then? Hearing nothing? Okay, move on from that. Thank you again, Felix. So, back to audience participation. Anyone on the phone? Hit *6 and give your name. Hearing no one.
Not pushing her.
All right. We ready to adjourn? Say we adjourn. Thanks.